Hi, and welcome to Vote 2014. I'm Sandy Jacobson. On today's program, we will be covering Ballot Measure D. We'll be talking with two designated proponents and two designated opponent speakers. After I give a brief summary of the ballot measure, each side will make an opening statement. We'll then have a discussion about the ballot measure, with each side having an equal opportunity to present their viewpoints. At the conclusion of our discussion, each side will make a closing statement. With me today as Measure D proponent are John Jarabek and Christian Fry. Thank you. And our Ballot Measure D opponents are John Fairweather and Kathy Larson. Thank you, John and Kathy, for joining us. Measure D adds a new provision to the Santa Monica City Charter that would require voter approval before the city could close Santa Monica Airport, wholly or in part, and before making any changes in the use of airport land to non-aviation uses. In other words, Measure D requires the city to continue operating the airport as it is currently used in every respect, unless a vote of the people authorizes otherwise. It defines voter approval as a majority of the voters of the city voting yes on a ballot measure approving such a change at a general municipal election. The measure, which is a charter amendment, also has a clause that retroactively requires any city decision made regarding the airport on or after the date of March 27, 2014, would need voter approval before going into effect. It also includes a provision that if two competing measures are placed on the same ballot, they would both go into effect except where provisions are in conflict, and then the provisions of the measure receiving the most votes would go into effect. So now it's time for opening statements, and John,
Yes.
You're going to lead us off.
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is John Jarabek. Next to me is Christian Fry. There's been a lot of discussion online and at public meetings about our historic airport. Debate topics have ranged from its value for disaster relief, police, fire, and rescue station to its contribution to the area's noise and pollution levels. But tonight, we aren't here to talk about any of those topics because none of them are on the ballot in November. What is on the ballot in November is one and only one very simple question. Who gets to control the future of 227 acres of land currently used for low-density purposes? Will the voters of Santa Monica get the exclusive right to decide what happens to this acreage? Or will 7 politicians and their developer friends control the outcome of the largest and most important land use decision in the history of the city of Santa Monica? We think it's time the voters decide and urge you to vote yes on Measure D and no on LC. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And John, will you handle the other side?
I will. Measure D takes away the council and electorate's ability to decide the future of our own land. It extends a 30-year subsidy gravy train that transfers $6 to $8 million a year from city to aviation businesses. It allows airport jet traffic to continue increasing at 30% a year, which will impact the whole city. It prevents the city from banning leaded fuel, installing required safety zones, and mitigating health impacts. It empowers airport interests to sue the city, so miring it in perpetual lawsuits. It prevents airport rents from being raised to market rates and reclaims non-aviation land bargained away by the FAA in 1984. And for $1 million and 6 months of deception, it rewrites the city charter against our own interests. If it passes in 2016, we'll see similar developer-funded rewrites, so we have to stop this now. So please vote no on Measure D.
Thank you, John, and thank you both for staying under your time limit. That's very good. I need to ask a question that occurred to me as I was preparing for this. What's the role of the FAA? Don't they have the power to compel the use as an airport indefinitely, or certainly up until the 2030 or something like that?
Yeah, the FAA has a very clear opinion about the ownership of the airport. After the end of World War II, they deeded the airport back to the city with what's referred to as the 1984 Instrument of Transfer, and gave that land back with one simple stipulation, that it be operated as an airport forever. So there's been ongoing legal battles for about the last 30 years. The FAA's never wavered from that position, that ultimately they assume that the city will continue to operate it as an airport. But again, I think that the trick here is what's in front of voters on November 4th really has very little to do with the FAA. We have an opportunity as citizens of Santa Monica to take control over that decision and decide for ourselves whether the 227 low-density acres of airport land is redeveloped and how.
And you're in agreement with that part of this?
Not necessarily. I mean, the 84 agreement, the operating 84 agreement between the FAA and the city of Santa Monica expires in 2015. So the city owns the airport land, and they have a right to do with the land, or the citizens have the right to do with the land what they desire. And at that time of expiration, there's a lot of limitations that the 84 agreement puts on the city. They will expire. So the city will then have more ability to especially improve the impacts of the airport on the surrounding neighborhood. So there's, I think, the FAA, it's a question whether the FAA really has the power, because the city actually owns the land. The FAA doesn't own the land.
So
and never did own the land. The government leased it during the war for $1. And after the war, they put this perpetuity provision on, which was then superseded by the 1984 agreement, which stipulates that it's all over on July 1st, 2015, and that's why this is on the ballot.
That's not a really accurate portrayal of the 84 agreement. The 84 agreement is an operating agreement, as she mentioned. The replacement of that agreement is certainly something the city and the residents and the pilots and the feds should be working on replacing. But there is no mention of, they're not related. The instrument of transfer and the 84 agreement are separate documents. One's an operating agreement, one transfers the land.
Let me move on, because this is a very complicated.
That's a point of contention.
Yes,
Okay,
point of contention, yes.
All right, we'll just agree to disagree.
That's right.
Who wrote Measure D and who's funding it? I suppose I should ask you that.
Sure. Yeah, John, you want to?
Sure. So Measure D is funded. Major funding is from the pilots, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and it was who wrote it specifically. I've never met the person who wrote it specifically, but it was written specifically to address the concerns about access to the airspace. And this actually speaks to your earlier point about the city's stated strategy to starve the aviation businesses out of existence at the airport, regardless of what happens to the 84 agreement.
And how do you respond to that?
Measure D was written by a law firm called Reed and Davidson, which specializes in writing ballot measures. And it was very cleverly written. In particular, the provision to redefine what voter approval means. Flora Yin, who was one of the original people that put the petitions out, is a principal in Reed and Davidson. Their funding, to the tune of 515 some odd thousand so far, is 3/4 of it comes from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association and the National Business Aviation Association.
Cindy, can I make a point here? I think it's important to note the motives behind pilots, I think we can all agree, are pretty clear. Pilots want to keep an airport. They want to see our 97-year-old municipal airport continue to be an airport. Their motives are transparent. The funders behind LC, some of the largest developers in our city, their motives, I think, are equally clear. They want to see the airport closed and the land redeveloped.
That's not
true.
But
the critical thing that we are here
the
critical thing that we're here to debate is who decides whether the airport's 227 acres are closed and redeveloped, voters or politicians.
Okay, so that's a good point. And here's what is interesting, because the way this is written, it says that the majority of voters would, the voter approval means a majority of the voters of the city voting yes on a ballot measure approving such a change at a general municipal election. What's the meaning of this statement? Does it mean approval by a simple majority of those actually voting, or does it mean a majority of all the registered voters?
This is a great question and a very important topic for people to understand. One of the great things about Measure D is the simplicity and clarity of its language. The reason that language is in there is to make voters completely aware of exactly what we're talking about. It's simple majority. This has been established by our city attorney, 3 separate state judges.
And a simple majority of the people voting?
Exactly.
Like
So
any-
if
like
100
any other
people
ballot
vote,
measure.
51
Like
would
any-
be a simple majority.
And the important I think phrasing there is a general municipal election. Okay, so the city can have a general municipal election whenever it chooses to deal with
At what
these
cost?
issues. At the cost of an election for 220 regarding
So every
227
time
acres.
something wants to be
time
changed at the airport,
no,
the
no,
city
no,
has
that's
to
not
have
true.
election.
Management
Now
of
you're
the
talking about
airport-
That's what it
says.
says.
That's what the language
management,
says.
That's not either. Management of the airport
does.
is left to the city. That's as plain as day.
Doesn't
It
say
says if
that.
they want to change any aviation use at
That's
the
not what
airport, it
says.
has to go to a
I
public
can
vote.
read you exactly what it says if you'd like. Unless voters have approved the closure of the airport, and this is the section that actually goes in the city charter, okay? Unless the voters have approved the closure of the airport pursuant to paragraph A, and such a decision becomes effective, the city shall continue to operate the Santa Monica Municipal Airport in a manner that supports its aviation purposes and shall not impose additional restrictions on providers of aviation support services to tenants and airport users that inhibit the sale of fuel or the use of full aviation
Exactly.
facilities.
We agree. Paragraph B means maintain the status quo. That's what paragraph B says.
Which is the city managing the airport.
Paragraph A says the term. First of all, nobody ever defines voter approval. And since this was written by Reed and Davidson, you have to look very closely at the language. It's deliberate. They didn't make a mistake here.
And neither did
It says
neither
it
did
says
the
the term voter approval means a majority of the voters of the city voting yes on a ballot measure approving such a change at a general municipal election. So a majority of the voters of the city, not the votes, the voters of the city voting yes on a ballot measure. That means it takes 31,800 votes to pass any change on the airport. And that would require a 75% yes vote and an unprecedented turnout.
That's
and it's
patently
never
absurd.
happened.
And
All
that's
right.
not what
No,
the
it's-
judges said.
It
Can I
needs to be
respond to that?
litigated.
Correctly.
Okay.
This is a very important piece of what we're discussing. Mr. Fairweather, you know that's not true.
I do know it's
absolutely
true.
not true.
It is true.
All right.
Simple majority. It couldn't be plainer. And the
It
reason
doesn't
that
say that.
language
It
is
doesn't
in
say
there
It doesn't
is
say
to
that.
make it clear.
It says the
If you
opposite.
meant to have simple
Three
majority, how
judges,
come the
our
language
city's
didn't
attorney
say
all
simple
agree.
Another
majority?
area where
Not
we
true.
agree to disagree.
We will agree to
And
disagree.
three judges also agree with what we say.
All right.
3 judges threw out lawsuits. They didn't spend
All right.
time focusing on the meaning
They
of that.
specifically
Let me bring up
address that
another.
issue.
Let me bring up another element of this that's a little bit unusual.
Sure.
Measure D changes the current legislative process. In other words, going through the city council and everything,
Right.
related to decision making for one geographic area of Santa Monica by moving that decision making authority from the city council to the voters of Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that? I'm going to let them comment first.
Well, yeah, it's clearly highly unusual and it subverts our normal process of representative government. And one has to ask, why is this subversion happening? And it's happening because it's in the interests of special interests, and they're masquerading as, being anti-development. But the truth is, since none of them are even from around here that back this measure, that's not what it's about. It's about subverting the charter of the city in order to maintain a gravy train of subsidies.
And can I say one more thing?
Sure.
It requires an up or down vote on a single issue, where when the city works on a project like the Civic Center, they have meetings, public meetings, input, consensus sessions, where people come together, discuss the future, and the way that is worded, it would force a single up or down, yes or no vote on every little change at the airport.
Okay, let's get back. That's an issue that I also had as a question, a follow-up. But let me get back to the fact that this election this ballot measure would affect one area in all of Santa Monica, and it would change the legislative process or contradict it in effect.
I don't think that's a fair representation. I think the the reality is the airport is a very important piece of property in this community. It's the size of downtown, 227 acres, the last really low density undeveloped piece of land in our community. Our contention is very simple and honest. The voters are the only people that haven't been heard in this process. We've heard from developers over the years, politicians, all sorts of people. The opportunity is unique. I agree. I think it's valuable that the voters have the opportunity to say whether we keep the airport or not, and whether we choose to redevelop that land and how. And it's very simple, simple voter majority. It does not inhibit the city in any way to be the manager of the airport, which they are, and even our airport commissioner, the chair of the airport commission, pointed out that the language does not, and I could quote, "If this so passed, the city manager would still have discretionary approval." The manager of the airport is the city.
I have a comment on that. You said the voters haven't been heard on this process. The city conducted an airport vision process. Anybody could sign up and be a part of that process. There were multiple meetings where a consultant was there taking people's input on the future of the airport land. There have been multiple city council meetings where anybody, whether you live in Santa Monica or not, can come and put in a chit, public comment, or send commentary via email. So that statement is not true.
Meetings are very different than a vote.
And that's our contention.
But that's how democracy works.
Is that
Voting,
democracy
I agree.
works
Why are we
by voting,
redefining
yes.
it?
We're simply asking it be put to a vote. Simple as that.
But you're saying that, let me see where my note is, any comment, any change would have to have voter approval.
No, the city can do it, manage the airport like they always have. What we're saying is before you take up the parts of LC, the part of redevelopment that has been pre-approved by the city council, as we'll talk about in LC later, that has to go before the voters. Before we rebuild 40 acres of educational facilities in the south side of the airport, those types of issues that deal directly with traffic and development have to be heard from by the voters.
This issue gets confused because of I think a little bit because of the second paragraph of our measure. And that paragraph is in there expressly because of the city's stated intention, and you can read a couple of different articles in the Santa Monica Daily Press about if they cannot close the airport through legal means, they're going to use a technique of starvation, eliminate fuel sales, eliminate aviation services. If we're going to have an airport be an airport, let's have an airport until it's decided otherwise. Very simple,
And
not
decided-
about
And
management.
decided by the residents.
What else is very simple is that it's time for us to close. Hard to believe it goes so fast.
Boy, it sure does.
Christian, you're going to close for your side.
Yes.
I will. So what's on the ballot this November 4th is whether voter approval is required before the city can close and redevelop the 227 acres of low-density airport land. Measure D requires voter approval to do that, and Measure LC allows closure and redevelopment without voter approval. We believe the voters should decide, not 7 politicians, tens of thousands of Santa Monicans. It's time for Measure D. The schemes to redevelop our municipal airport began back in '81 when the city passed Resolution 2296 stating that 6296 stating their intention to close the airport. Since then, everybody's weighed in, everyone except the voters. Measure D requires voter approval before the city can close or redevelop the airport. It's simple and honest. It's not managerial. LC contains 3 magic words: without voter approval. On November 4th, vote yes on D and no on LC.
Thank you, Christian. And John, please.
You've heard many statements and scary consequences from Measure D, but not a single one of these things they suggest can be substantiated. Measure D's strategy is based on fear, uncertainty, and deception. But we don't believe that the electorate is as gullible as Washington lobbyists obviously think. So we expect to send a strong message by rejecting D and supporting LC in November. Remember, Measure D campaigns 99% funded by out-of-state special interests and non-locals, but Measure LC is 99% funded by local residents. Measure D is to maintain the status quo and preserve the gravy train of subsidies. It has 0 credible endorsements, and in contrast, LC is endorsed by virtually every community organization and literally hundreds of community leaders. Check out our website, itsourland.org, to see. So please vote yes on LC and no on D. Your future quality of life depends on it.
Thank you, John. I'd like to thank our proponents and opponents for Ballot Measure D for being here today. For more Santa Monica election programming, go to smvote.org or watch cable channel 99 for Vote 2014 election programming that is on 24 hours per day until Election Day. I'm Sandy Jacobson, and remember to get out and vote on November 4th.